This is Dr. Sujata Sharma. Now let's talk about the two burning questions that everybody is asking nowadays. One, when is the COVID-19 pandemic going to end? And two, how many more peaks are we going to see before this pandemic completely ends? When I was a small child, I used to always wonder why we bother to study history. I used to feel that it's now done and dusted with, so what do we need to study this for? But it's only when I grew up I realized that there are a lot of answers that we don't have currently, and those answers are always found buried in the past, buried in the history. So sometimes when we have questions and we do not have answers, we need to go back in history and find something which will indicate the answer for what we are looking for. So let's go back, say something like 100 years back, something like in the year 1918, when we had another pandemic just like COVID-19 pandemic. The name of that pandemic was Spanish flu. Why it was called Spanish flu is not because it originated in Spain. It actually originated somewhere in USA and then spread all over the world. It was called Spanish flu because in World War I, that is when this thing was going on, many of the countries had put a lot of censors on their media. And it was only in Spain, which was a relatively neutral country, that the first reports of this particular illness started appearing. So it was named Spanish flu, and after that the name simply stuck. Was it as bad as COVID-19? I would say it was much worse than that. Just imagine that something like 50 to 70 million people died in Spanish flu. That is when the population of the world was 28% of what it is now. Then the number of 70 million people is simply too devastating. And if you see COVID-19, then so far we've had around 3.2 million deaths. So in comparison, yes, Spanish flu was really bad. Now let's talk about the similarities between Spanish flu and COVID-19 pandemic. I'll show you some pictures of Spanish flu. As you can see, there are some hospital scenes, then there are some people walking by on the streets, and then there are some doctors who are treating Spanish flu patients. And the most interesting thing is that you may feel that I'm showing you pictures of COVID-19 pandemic, only they are in black and white. That is how similar these two pandemics were. Both are caused by viruses. Of course, they are two different viruses, but they're caused by viruses. And both of them are causing respiratory illnesses, which can range from mild to asymptomatic to moderate to severe and ultimately causing death. And also both of them, they cause cytokine storm in your body, which is what ravages your body completely. And of course, they were also similar in a way that they were novel viruses. When they appeared, when they suddenly struck, there were no drugs, there were no vaccines, and there was no knowledge about these kind of viruses. So they were novel viruses which were very, very hard to control. Both the Spanish flu and COVID-19 are different in terms of virology. Spanish flu was caused by H1N1 virus, and COVID-19 is caused by SARS-CoV-2, that is a coronavirus. And definitely coronavirus is far more infectious, more contagious and more dangerous as compared to H1N1 virus. Now let's talk about the waves of Spanish flu. As you can see from the picture, there were three major waves. The first wave came in March 1918. The second wave came in September 1918. And as you can see, the second wave was really very, very big. And the third wave came in January 1919. Then there was another fourth wave, which was pretty mild, and it was also localized in some very specific areas. So yeah, you must be thinking, how is it that the second wave is so deadly? And there are parallels if you see in terms of COVID-19. The second wave is really very bad. Why does this happen? It does happen that the second wave of pandemics is always very bad. There are two reasons for it. The first reason is that in the beginning of the pandemic, everybody is very scared. Everybody fears this new entity and people are huddling inside, they're not intermingling. But as time passes, something like pandemic fatigue takes place. People want to go out, they want to intermingle, they want to have a normal life. And what happens then is that the virus spreads. If you have gone through my earlier videos, you would know that the spread of the virus is directly proportional to the number of the variants or the mutants or the strains of the viruses that can be produced. So that is what happens. New mutants come, and some of these mutants or variants are really very deadly. They're very dangerous, they're very infectious. And that is what causes the second wave to be really bad. By the time we come to the third wave, a lot of herd immunity has set in, and so less people are getting infected. And slowly the virus is also mutating to less infectious strains. And what about our country, India? Did it get affected during the Spanish flu? Yes, it did. In fact, it was very, very badly affected. It was one of the most severely affected countries in the world. Almost 17 million people died in India. That's about 5% of the population, which was completely wiped off. Back then, it was known as Bombay flu or Bombay fever. That's because Bombay, which is known as Mumbai right now, was the first place to have seen these cases, and then they spread all over the country. How bad it was, you can make this out by this fact that between 1911 and 1921, this was the only decade in which the population of our country actually went down. So it was really bad. How did Spanish flu end? Well, it ended in 2 years, started in 1918, ended in 2020. And as I've already spoken before, it ended because of two reasons. One is that the herd immunity took over because of so many infections. And number two, the variants became less deadly, less infectious, which is the way virus usually ends in all kinds of pandemics. And mind you, there were no vaccines back then. The vaccines came much later. They came sometimes in 1940s. So what are the lessons that we can take from Spanish flu? Lesson number 1, pandemics have happened before. In fact, much worse pandemics have happened before, and the world did not end. So COVID-19 pandemic is also going to go away soon. The world will not end. We are going to win. Lesson number 2, which is a very important lesson. Back then, about 100 years ago, in 1918, the medical technology was not as advanced as it is now. Vaccines could not be rolled out immediately within 1 year of seeing the first infection. And there was no internet, the knowledge wasn't as good as it is now, awareness wasn't there, communication wasn't there. And back then, so many deaths happened, so much suffering occurred. And ultimately, the pandemic ended just because of herd immunity taking over. The advantage we have is that we are living in 2021 now. Everything is at our fingertips. Knowledge is there, awareness is there, and the best news is that vaccines are there. They have been developed so fast. We do not have to wait for herd immunity. We can just go and get ourselves vaccinated. So that is it. Everybody who's watching me just now, please try and go and get yourself vaccinated if you haven't already, whenever your turn comes. Let's defeat COVID-19. Finally, do subscribe to my channel, Science Popularization by Sujata Sharma. I'm very, very passionate about popularization of science in the society. I'm very keen that there should be a scientific temperament amongst everybody, not just amongst scientists and doctors and researchers. Keep smiling, be positive, and get vaccinated. Thank you so much.